Welcome to the Lightforge. This is ADWCTA.
This is Merps. Happy Feast of Wintervale to everyone. Happy holidays. I hope everyone who is listening just had a very good weekend overall, you know?
Yeah. It's been we've been doing a lot of arena runs actually over the holidays. We did like a Christmas Eve stream and then we hit almost a high. We got 7K viewers on our Christmas stream and that was really fun. And one thing that I have noticed, so we're just gonna kick this off right away. With the observation that I don't know if it's the holidays, I don't know if it's everyone getting out of school and like being able to really focus in on the arena, but things have gotten a lot harder in the last few weeks. Like last 2 weeks, maybe even 3 weeks. I want to say probably more like 2 weeks. From what I can tell, at least my record has been plummeting. It was like 8.5 wins per run, and now it's at something like, I think it's already below 8. It's definitely above 7.5. But in the span of 2 weeks, it's dropped. My LOE stats have dropped by a ton. And overall, it just seems like I haven't gotten any 12 wins, and I've been playing a lot of arena, and it just seems like the matchups get really insanely difficult, starting at around like 8 wins, and it just becomes very hard to go past that in the last 2 weeks.
This is what our show is about today. The holiday spirit is over, the festivities are over, and we're just gonna start complaining about our opponents in the arena, right?
Yeah. Oh, and there was one game where I got double MC teched on the same turn, so I lost that game.
You just got outskilled, man.
I mean, he held it. He waited for me to play 5 minions. He MCT'd, shadow stepped it or something. It's just definitely outskilled.
Definitely. But I do agree, and it's a topic that we have touched upon, I think, during the last Lightforge, or possibly the last two Lightforges. We've talked about how the arena has been getting a little bit harder. This specific reason, we've tossed out kind of a few hypothetical reasons. Maybe some players are just transitioning to other things like real life, not wizard poker anymore. People could just be getting more skilled.
So you mean the bad players are transitioning to real life while the good players stick it out?
Yes. The good players are too hot committed to this aspect of their life. While other people are like, well, I probably have better things going on, in which case they're just lying to themselves because Hearthstone is the best thing ever. But I think these are all possible, reasons why the arena is getting harder. And I do think it's getting harder as well. And just from watching other arena streamers as well, it doesn't seem like we are an outlier, right?
Yeah. It seems like everyone's been having a rougher time of it lately definitely compared to earlier in LoE, and that's kind of to be expected because from what we've seen during the release of expansions, the meta always gets softer right at the outset, and then it kind of gets back to its more difficult state. But right now, I think the arena is even harder than what it was at like the height of TGT.
Yeah, I definitely think it's the hardest it's ever been, which is great in a way, right? As a good player who wants to get better, you want to face good opponents, and you want to kind of keep pushing yourself to get better. And it's kind of fun sometimes to just have a relaxing game where your opponent like coins out an arcane intellect followed by an acolyte of pain, and you're just like, okay, thanks for the win. But if you really do want to get better, you want to face these opponents who really challenge you, who not only have good cards and good decks, but play them very well. And you can see the reasoning behind their plays. Sometimes you make a read on them, they make a read on you, and it's back and forth, and it really is a great game. But this is surprising because this isn't something that we expected so soon.
No, this was like really quick, right? Like
Yes.
Wing 4 came out 2 weeks ago, and it's been like that basically since Wing 4 came out, like since 5 days after Wing 4 came out.
Yeah. And attached to this this difficulty level of the arena and just the skill of the opponents, decks also seem to be really good now, and that's something I have a little bit harder time explaining. I'm seeing
What do you mean? Blizzard gives other players good decks and you bad decks.
That is the universal truth, right?
Yeah,
Isn't that just how
that's
Hearthstone
applicable
works?
to everybody who plays this game.
Right, that's true. And I don't know what would happen if like we faced each other, because that would just be like,
Well, you would have the good deck when I'm facing you, and I would have the good deck when you're facing me.
Gotcha. That's how it works.
Hmm.
Blizzard can tell these things. They've been around the block. They know how to manipulate these things. You got to
Well,
put
they
your
make the
faith.
game, so they can really do whatever they want with
That's
it.
true. That's true. But
Um,
yeah, I'm definitely seeing some really good decks at 4 or 5 wins, and typically you don't see those types of just like perfect curve and great card quality decks up until like 8, 9 wins. I'm not saying every deck is like that. It's just the overall feeling of the arena has become definitely more stressful. Just getting to 7-0 and 8-0 is pretty hard now. Like I feel as if you have to jump some major hurdles in order to get to that spot. And at the end of TGT and at the beginning of LOE, I feel as if I personally was on a very good run, and I was always feeling confident. I'm like, all right, every single time I play, I feel confident I can get like 10 or above, or even maybe a 12. And now I'm just like, well, 12 is still definitely in play, but I'm not expecting that much from, if it's an average or below average deck.
yeah, yeah. I mean, so what do we do about it? What is the prescription for this new, more difficult meta? So it's not like the meta came crashing down and we all went from near 8 win players, or in the OE sense higher than 8 win players, down to like 5 wins. But still, you get knocked down by 1 win per run. It kind of hurts. So how do we recover? What is your plan right now? Because assuming this isn't like kind of a weird Winter Veil kind of meta thing, and that it's the new norm for LE going forward, we got 3 months of this left. I think neither of us are satisfied just being 7 win per run players. So what is the game plan to get back, or to maintain the 7.5 wins per run that we have not been getting in the past 2 weeks?
Sure. So I think the most important part, and everyone should follow this advice, just like don't panic. If you're a good player, you didn't just like forget everything that you learned, and you didn't just start playing poorly overnight. If you
Yeah,
just
and if
start,
you've been having like a good like skill growth during LOE or whatever, and it's going
yeah,
down a bit now, that doesn't mean all of a sudden you got worse. I think the meta really is harder.
yeah, I think it genuinely is harder. So first thing you do, don't panic, just kind of calmly assess the situation. And then I think there are a couple of tweaks that you can make to your game. One thing that I'm making to my sort of my game plan is I do draft a little bit greedier now. I think that with the current meta, like one thing I did not adequately account for is just drafting a little bit greedier when you are playing a class that can play greedy, like mage, for example. I've actually gotten quite a few 12-win mages in the past 2 3 weeks, and in all of those decks,
Oh yeah, that's right. You've been doing better than I have because you've been playing off stream
I
because
have
you were actually back with your family, and so you couldn't stream. And I kept like I'm actually here streaming, and I see you like on my friends list pop up with these toasts, and it's like well, I'm struggling to get like 7 8 wins. It's like Merps is currently is in an arena match with 9 wins, with 10 wins, with 11 wins,
Yep.
just showing
Well,
me up on my own stream.
yeah, I'm like, oh yeah, it's more difficult. Let's not make Adam to feel bad. Of course, it's more difficult. Yeah, no, I mean it actually is more difficult. But one thing I have noticed, and so I've had a couple of just stinkers in my past arena runs as well. With decks in which maybe a month ago I would have been like, oh yeah, it's a 7 8 win deck, and I end up going like 3 4
Yeah.
wins with it because you just run into a couple of buzzsaw decks. But I think that one thing you want to do is if you can afford, like, you want to draft a little bit greedier than before, and it'll pay off. Like I'm reaching for that 12 win now, and I think if you just go safe because your opponents are good players and because they are going for good decks as well,
Yep.
you're just gonna get outgunned. And you're superior. Like if you think, oh, I am a top one
So what
percent
do you mean
player.
by greedy? Do you just mean like bigger cards? Like care less about the curve and then hope it curves out? Like going
Yeah.
for the value
So
picks?
Yes, so I'll give you like a specific example. For let's just say it's pick 20. I only have like two 4 drops, and one of them isn't even like a true 4 yet, and it's pick 20, right? But I have a choice between like a Dongler and Aspirant and a Boulderfist Ogre. I'll go with the Boulderfist Ogre.
Okay.
Something like that. I think that was exactly the situation during one of my mage drafts, and it made me ponder. I'm just like, I should probably pick the 4, but I'm like, Darn Aspirant is one of those cards where, and because of my experience with the arena, I'm just like, I've had these situations where I just get into top deck wars, or I just don't have enough stuff, and these other players with their Keeper of Ultimans, with their Ethereal Conjurers, with just big stuff, and they just outlast me. I need to be a little bit greedier to kind of keep up with this arms race that's going on in the arena right now.
Okay, and do you think that and because I've realized this when I've been playing, you get punished less for not having 2 drops these days
Yes.
than in like TGT meta. One, because people are less often are going to curve out less often, which is just drafting odds. They only introduced one common neutral 2 drop, and they got rid of the TGT bonus. And this the whole thing just doesn't add up to more 2 drops. It means less 2 drops. So everyone's going to curve out a bit less just based on that. But also, if you don't curve out, you can kind of come back because, like you said, so many of these games are going to top deck wars. I think much more frequently, definitely much more frequently than BRM. But also around the same as in TGT, but with less of those inspire mechanics that will actually end the game. So, kind of more like the old school top deck wars you kind of saw in Classic.
Yeah, it's definitely getting to that point, and you definitely see kind of the effect of this value game from how many times I've been beaten by priest, or I have beaten people with a priest by playing Museum Curator on turn 2. Right?
Yep.
You play Museum Curator on turn 2. That is anti-tempo. You are missing +1/+1 worth of stats on turn 2, which is huge, absolutely huge.
Yep.
And you are losing the board. You're effectively saying no matter what you put out, it will dominate this 1-2, and I am losing the board right here. But that's actually okay. And that's the perfect example of how this meta is shaping out. And lots of times, what you draw off of the Museum Curator is going to be a premium card, right? Piloted Sky Golem, Dark Cultist, just lots of good death rattles. And you can say like, okay, I can lose the +1/+1, but the value I gain from that super great card, super great death rattle card, is going to make up for it later. And if this were another meta, like a GVG meta, that would totally not work. That just, you would just lose right there. But the fact that it's working and you can play Museum Curator on turn 2 and not just immediately like kill your win rate, that says something about the meta.
Did you have like a good experience with the Museum Curator priest?
Yeah, I did. So I've been playing. You guys can tell how much I've been playing off stream because I have like loads of experience to share with you guys. I played with a double Museum Curator priest, and that's how there was nothing spectacular about it. I didn't have Valens. I didn't have anything. It was just Museum Cure, and my 2 drops were 2 Museum Curators, 1 Jeweled Scarab, and 2 actual 2 drops. So
Wait, how many 1 drops did you have?
I just had a Northshard Cleric. That was it.
So you had no early game whatsoever as a priest.
No, and I got to 8 wins, and one of them I got MCT'd. That
How
just
many?
really
Wait, is it Holy Novas, Light Bombs?
one Holy Nova, and that was it. That
What?
was it, I know
What?
it's ridiculous. And it just goes to show kind of you in another meta, like I would have died, and like I got some really good draws off the.
I mean,
tools.
in this meta, I would die. I had like a 2-win priest with 3 Museum Curators. They just didn't do anything because you would play them and then you draw a Death Rattle card, and Death Rattle cards are all anti-tempo anyway because you don't get the tempo until the thing dies, the second part of the tempo. So I kind of like played them when I needed to, and then I just died. I don't know.
Yeah, and look, these are overall small sample sizes, right?
Right.
But I also have been beaten by priests while playing other classes. They play Museum Curator. I'm like, oh, that's.
I haven't beaten by
horrifying.
priests with Museum Curators before, where they like sneak it in and then they play 2 things with Death Rattles on the same turn or something, and then you can't remove it, and then they win because they now have the board.
Right, and then they'll like that gives them the Sludge Belcher, that gives them the Cultist, and you're just like, oh, that's really annoying. Death Rattle minions are super annoying, right? And given the choice of three, they're going to get a really good one. I think I'm not ready to say Museum Curator is like a completely OP card. It's not up there with kind of the real. I don't think it can compete with the real winners of LOE, which I think are Ethereal Conjurer and Keeper of Oldham but it is a very, very good card.
Huh. Okay. I mean, I just had one run with experience with it, and that card just basically did nothing for like all 5 games, whether win or lose. But we have it rated as a 68. We obviously believe in the card.
Yeah.
It draws an incredibly good card. Is the basis for why we rated it so high. And the 1/2 does come in handy. There's still plenty of 1/1s hanging around in this meta, and as the priest, being able to deal 1 damage is definitely not irrelevant in the mid and late game. So.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's a good card. So we're talking about the difficulty of the meta. It definitely got harder, but there are ways around it. I think the idea is that you draft a little more greedy. When the decks get better, you need your deck to get better too. And because you're being punished less for curving out, the benefit to you. There's no longer a curving out tempo arms race that was kind of at its height when GVG first came out last year. And it's been being tampered down ever since. But even in even in the Grand Tournament expansion, there was still an arms race to get the board because you needed the board for your Inspire mechanics to really work well. Like if you have the board and then you Murloc Knight, game over. You have the board and then you Cavaldia Raider, game over. You have the board and you Mookless Champion, right? It's things like that. And all of those odds are just the odds of drafting all of those things are lower and lower and lower, and so the tempo meta has kind of gone back. It's not that it's no longer a tempo meta; it's just not an insanely tempo meta where nearly always the tempo play is the right one. Now you get a little more flexibility to miss that drop. Or to play like a less spectacular card on that drop and still be able to eventually outvalue your opponent. And that used to be something you could somewhat reliably do in Classic. That's why the 2 coin out of 4 play another 4 play was so popular in Classic. And we're kind of back there now again. So draft a little more value oriented. I'm definitely going to give that a shot in the next week and see how it goes. So one more thing we wanted to talk to you about today, getting more down to the mechanics in Deep Fried Meta, where we deep fry the meta. Today we are deep frying the 4-drop, which I think it really ties in with what we were talking about before of how difficult the meta may or may not be getting, because 4-drops are one of the linchpins of how the arena works. And it's one of the key things you have to kind of look at to understand the arena valuation system. Back in the day, 4-drops used to be king, right? Yeti was king, and that was because Yetis traded up with pretty much every 3-drop that existed in the game, except for Scarlet Crusader. Today, that's true as well. You have Scarlet Crusader, then you have like Ice Rager, and that's kind of it. Everything else that's a 3-drop still trades down with the Yeti. And so it lets you really establish a foothold on 4. And on the other hand, it used to be that there were not that many 5-drops that was able to kill the Yeti. Almost all the 5-drops back in the day traded evenly with the Yeti as well. So that's what made the Yeti so popular. But now you have a lot more 5/5s for one. You have the Clockwork Knight, the Tiger gaining in popularity. It's a 6-drop, but Frost Elemental is gaining in popularity. And of course, you have Pit Fighter. So the Yeti is loses a little bit of value from the new cards that were introduced. Also, it questionably trades well with Piloted Shredder, which it could trade well, but it could just get pinged off or something like that, right? Because you're already dealing 4 damage and it survives. So it's getting a little more iffy on that. But one of the things that the Yeti has that no other card will ever take its place in is that, and this is why 4 is kind of the center of everything. If you look at your curve in the arena, it's going to center somewhere between 3 and 4. And that is that if you have a hard removal, which is Assassinate, you can't use it on a Yeti. You can, but you're actually losing tempo to remove something. And generally, you gain tempo when you remove stuff because you can deal the damage that you need. So if you remove a 5-drop with an Assassinate, you're trading evenly in tempo. If you remove a 4-drop with an Assassinate, you are trading down in tempo. If you polymorph a Yeti, what happens? You still have a 1/1 that you have to remove somehow. So all of the hard removals start trading evenly at the 5-drop, which means at the 4-drop, you want to use less. Like, if possible, use some other type of removal. But there's no removal. There's almost no removal that deals 5 damage. The only one that deals 6 is Fireball, and then you have like weird ones like Lava Shock, not Lava Shock, Lava Burst, and like Arcanite Reaper. And these are very class specific, and they're with classes that are not too commonly played. So 4-drop still centers the arena in that you put your opponent from his hand in this awkward spot, right? And Yeti also survives a Flame Strike, of course. So there's no good way, there's no efficient way to deal with your 4-drops. You have to, it doesn't allow you to cheat. And the Yeti also survives Shadow or Death. There's just so many good things going for this 4-drop category.
Yeah. Adding a little bit to that. I'm going to take this a little bit back. Part of the reason why historically 4-drops, because if you've been playing for a long time, you probably know that historically, 4-drops have been it, right? That's the anchor to your deck. And kind of in Classic and in Nax, everyone tried to get that mid-range, sort of slower type of deck. But if you looked at the initial structure of Hearthstone and how they made the stat distribution for cards, other than 1-drops, your 2, 4, and 6-drops all had an additional stat point than your 3 and your 5-drops. And that's why the arena centered around your 2-drops, which were, Bloodfin Raptor, and no one picked River Croc just because of the 3-drop situation, but the Yeti and the Boulderfist Ogre, right?
Right.
And the Raptor it wasn't picked as highly just because you don't get as much value out of your 2-drops, and we were still playing a value-oriented game. The Boulderfist Ogre, that was sort of a little bit, you have to wait until turn 6 to be able to play it. But the
reason that the Raptor isn't is because the Raptor is not even in the same category as the Yeti and the Boulderfist Ogre. It's a reverse stat distribution. It's a more attack than defense, not a more defense than attack. And it was viewed that way because people didn't play 1-drops.
Yes.
So if everyone had to play a 1-drop, then your 2/3s will be really good because it'll eat up all the 1-drops.
Yep.
But so that's like a little different.
Right.
In terms of its valuation.
In terms of stats, usually for 3s, you didn't have Spider Tank, so you had 3 3s. Right. And 3 3s only had 1 stat up on 2 3s or 3 2s. And when you went from turn 4 to turn 5, you only had like 5 5s, right? Or 4 6s. So you only had that +1 stat. And then you had weird cards like Ventricle Mercenary, which bucked that trend, but then there was a drawback. So it wasn't just a pure vanilla card. We're talking about pure vanilla stat distributions here. And so it gave this really nice peak for the 4-drops, and it made Yeti just a super premium card. And historically, that's kind of why 4-drops are so important. And ADWCTA is now talking about why 4-drops are still really important, even though the initial reason has gone away, because now we have Spider Tanks, we have Pit Fighters,
what I'm trying to say is actually that it's not as important anymore. Like, it's still very important, but it's no longer king.
Right.
You see how the Yeti has on our tier list been dropping very steadily in value since we were in the Nax. We started our tier list in the Nax meta, and since then it has just moved down almost every other time we've revised the tier list. And so now it's even below a 70. It's ranked the same as a Pit Fighter, the same as a Boulderfist Ogre, the same as what a Spider Tank would be if it wasn't a mech.
Yes.
So all of them are now the same because there is now nothing special about the 4-drop when it comes to its stat distribution, because the other drops all kind of cover it. So now you have a nice chain, right, of like going from 2-3 to 3-4 to 4-5 to 5-6. So the one point that I was talking about before, which is that it's still the most awkward card to remove, that's being given to the Yeti. And it makes up for the fact that a Pit Fighter is just a bigger card, right? If you were
Yeah.
given a choice, and we were just talking before about winning top deck wars, right? Your opponent plays Yeti, you play a Pit Fighter, you hugely win that top deck war. You end up with a 5-2 on the board. That's gaining an Ice Rager for no extra cards. That's an insane value gap. And the reason the Pit Fighter isn't doing better than the Yeti in terms of value is just that the Yeti is just that difficult to remove.
Yeah, we've all gone through those situations where, like, a pit fighter comes out, you feel good fireballing a pit
You
fighter,
feel
right?
really good
You
fireballing a
feel
Pit Fighter.
really
You
good,
gain 1 mana.
right? You feel okay when you fireball something like Yeti or just a 4 drop, right? Like a
Yeah.
Trog or something like a Violent Teacher. You're like, okay, I got to do this, but
And
um,
it's a fireball. Who has fireballs? You
just
know,
one guy.
imagine if you're like a paladin, right?
Yep.
Imagine if you're a rogue who has fireballs. It's just one class has fireballs. Uh, so it even in the kind of worst case scenario, the mana considerations still come into play, which makes the pit fighter a bit weaker. And then you go down and you look at the 3 drops, and you have to ask the natural question, which is why is the Yeti not higher rated than a uh, than a generic 3-4 neutral minion? And the answer to that is that there's curve considerations that come into play. Because you need a certain number of 3s much more desperately than you need a certain number of 4s. Right? Like 2 drops will be
Yep.
worth nothing if you didn't have to curve out. They're awful cards. They're tiny. And if you have a 3-2, which is the only. So the difference between a 2-3 and a 3-2, if you look at it this way, is that a 3-2 has 50% more damage than a 2-3. That's insane. That means you should almost always pick a 3-2 unless your 2-3 is going to eat up a 1-drop, which it's probably not going to do. And the reason the 2-3 and 3-2s are kind of the same is because that 2 health, especially later on against like consecrations, just a lot of things deal 2 damage and a lot less things deal 3 damage. But getting back to the drops, we tell people to take enough 2 drops because there are enough 2 drops that are being offered that you can always get 5, you can generally get 6, you can even go higher and build a 2-drop deck. It's really, really hard to build a deck with enough 3 drops. There are never enough 3 drops in this game. Uh, if you were trying to do the thing where, assuming you always go first, you want the same percentage to draw a 2 drop and the same percentage to draw a 3 drop, and you want, let's say, 80% chance to do both if you just mulligan for it and mulligan for nothing else. Well, you're going to need like a little over 6 2 drops, and you're going to need 6 3 drops. I don't care who you talk to. I don't care which streamer or which arena expert you talk to. No one's going to recommend that you take 6 3 drops. Not because it's not good to get 6 3 drops. We just showed you that if you really want to curve out, you do need 6 3 drops. That's just how, if you do the math, that's just how it works out. But in order to get that amount of 3 drops into your deck, what would happen is you would be taking really crappy 3 drops.
Yep.
And when a 3 drop is really crappy, it's not really a 3 drop anymore. It's like a glorified 2 drop almost. So at that point, you might as well just be taking 2 drops. So there's this weird balancing thing that's kind of going on when you're taking 2s and 3s, which makes the premium 3 drops extra important. And that's why that and the Yeti are the same value, even though the Yeti does make things much more awkward for people.
Yeah, and you see this with so ADWCTA was talking about how easy it is to get to, and you see this with just kind of how Blizzard decided the power level of these drops, right? What you see with the 2 drops is you have a Bloodfin Raptor, and that's just how much stats. It should be either a 2-3 or a 3-2. That should just be what it gets, right? And if it gets something in addition to it, maybe it loses a stat point or it shouldn't get too much of a bonus. But we see a lot of great bonuses from neutral cards. Flame Juggler, right? 1 damage to
Yep.
randomly anywhere. That's fantastic. That's what makes Flame Juggler amazing. You have a Huge Toad, right? And that's kind of the reverse Flame Juggler. And although its effect, because your opponent can control it, is not as impactful, it's still really good. One damage in the early game definitely makes a difference. And then you have just weird cards that can have huge value as well, like Recombobulator, right?
Yep.
That's a 3/2 in which if you don't get value out of it, sure, you're never disappointed with a Bloodfin Raptor. And if you can turn your like 8/2 Iron Bark Protector into something else, that's fantastic. So it's just how Blizzard decided on the power level of these cards as well. And you see that on three
Well, so
drops.
yeah, Blizzard's deciding on the power level. Also, I think it's worth it to mention that a 0 mana card is a 1/1
Yeah,
because there's value to the card itself, and that value is static. Whether you're playing an 8 mana card or a 0 mana card, you're still only giving up one card. So when the 2 drop is looked at as a 3/2, that's actually understated because it should be 3/2 plus something, right? It's always 3/2 plus something for the most part, or a 2/3 plus something. If you're looking at a 1 drop, it's not a 2/1 or 1/2 plus something. It's usually a 2/1 or a 1/2 plus something that's pretty much worth another stat point. Um, because that's how the valuation goes. And on the other hand, when you get to the 4 drop, it disappears, right?
yep,
You don't see Yetis with extra abilities. You very rarely see like Lost Hall Striders with extra ability, right? Like Tomb Pillager kind of bucks that trend a bit.
right.
And there are other cards like
Evil Heckler with a
Evil
taunt.
Heckler, Mech Mage
Yeah.
stuff. So they're starting to move into the category where even 4 drops get some extra abilities, but you don't see it in 5 drops. And I think they're starting to come to terms with the fact that the power creep on the 4 drops is real, and that the real center of the game should now be at 5 in terms of when the bonus from the card, like when the value from the card itself halves.
Yes.
Because it halves because you normally get +1/+1 of stats. At the Pit Fighter, you get 5/6 of stats. So you've halved the amount of additional value, and you're not giving it anything extra. But that provides the recognition that even at a 4 mana card, you should be getting a little bit something else. And then they also do this weird thing. We can talk about this some other day, but like later on, when you look at like 9 mana cards and 10 mana cards, you get like way more stats and stuff like that. Than you would. So there are many factors that come into play with how Blizzard does the card design. But let's go back to the 4 drops. Let's get back to how many 4 drops do we need in a deck now? We are in the LOE meta. How many do you think we needed in Classic, and how many now? Is there a difference? Where are we coming with this?
Sure. So the rule with 4 drops is always, you didn't need a huge number of them because you could always draw into them, right? With 2 drops, you just had your mulligan, and then you had to basically draw into a 2 immediately.
Yep.
And then you had to play it. With 4s, you're allowed a little bit of a leeway. We can all count. You have 2 more turns to draw your 4 drop. So you have those 2 extra chances. I think that kind of the safe range for 4 drops, you wanted at least 4 4s, right? You needed at least 4 4s. 5 was kind of the sweet spot. And I don't think it's changed that much. Although I don't know your opinion on this, I don't think it's changed that much. I think, kind of tying this back to what we said before, maybe you shift your curve a little bit higher. But for 4 drops, I think that is kind of the sweet spot, and it hasn't moved by that much. And once again, when we're talking about 4 drops, we don't include like Cult Master in there. We don't include Enhanto Mechano in there. These are kind of the solid 4 drops, the Evil Hecklers, the Yetis that you actually want to play on 4.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the minimum number of 4 drops you want in a deck hasn't changed that much. I would say it's 4. It's actually 5, but like with the 3 drops, I don't know. Depending on the class, you may or may not be able to get 5 quality 4s, and it's probably not worth it to like go out of your way to pick like a really bad 4 when you have another good option. But you may want to give it some consideration. The more important part, I think, is that it used to be the case because of just how weak the larger cards were. That you are just there's no such thing as too many 4 drops. You can just take as many 4 drops as you want, as long as you have your earlier curve all planned out. Because the 5 drops weren't that much better than the 4 drops, and then by the 6 drops you could play a 4 and a 2, and then you're just kind of like a faster deck, right? You didn't need the Boulder Fist Ogre, you could just play a Yeti and a Raptor, and you're kind of there too. Now you just want to hit face a little bit more and play a little bit more tempo. That is no longer the case now, and it hasn't been the case in a while, because Blizzard kept making better and better, bigger cards. Your Force Tank Max came out. Your Pit Fighter came out. All these, just acceptable 5-drops have come out. And Kraken now is a card.
Yeah.
So with all of these bigger cards that have come out, you lose on the value game. Like I was talking about the Pit Fighter Yeti matchup. Well, if you have a Pit Fighter and you have a Boulder Fist Ogre, now you have double the amount of pure neutral, on-curve matchups that the Yeti is going to die to very unfavorably. And with that in play, you can no longer have unlimited amounts of 4-drops and still generally win the value game. If you just have a ton of 4-drops, you actually have a very thin deck. Like, your deck is not big. It's not winning the card advantage war. You need other ways to get your card advantage. So now, I actually try to watch out and make sure I don't get enough 4-drops, or that if I just have a lot of very high-quality 4-drops I still want to take, that I make sure I have another way to get value. Because 4-drops, unfortunately, is very mid-game, right? You don't get to play, like, 2/2s on turn 4, spread the board, and be able to hit his face. You don't get to do a lot of those things. You're kind of playing for that, like, turn 8, turn 9 push to the face kind of swing. So you need to structure your deck based on that way if you don't have the card advantage. Like, you just can't hang out and wait for the card advantage to come to you if you just have a whole ton of 4-drops.
Yeah, I agree. I think part of why fours were so dominant before were like you said, what was the best late game drop from before? It was Boulder Fist Ogre, right? And Boulder Fist Ogre is still great, but now so back then it was Boulder Fist Ogre and Stormwind Champion.
Stormwind Champion, yeah.
That's
those were the only 2 cards that were like big and good.
And now those 2 are still good. No one can deny that they're good cards. But you have so many good late game cards now, and ranging from just kind of
I mean, we listed this, Krakens, Force Tank Maxes.
Yeah, so it's kind of like before you were losing value by picking those cards. Now you're losing value by picking your 4s. So it's a different time.
And one thing that I want to, before we move on to the next topic, the one thing I want to talk about with 4-drops is there's this idea that goes around. I hear it all the time. And it's not a wrong idea, like, all the time, but I think people greatly overestimate it. If you just do the math on this, the idea, by the way, is that I don't need 4s if I have a lot of 2s. Because I could just play 2 2s on turn 4, rather than a 4-drop. That is true if you have 2 2s in your hand, or even like a 2-drop and a 2-mana removal that you manage to hit or something, or just something else to do with the 2 mana, you can, and it's very good to play that instead of necessarily a 4-drop. The problem is, in order to reliably pull that off, by turn 4 you need to draw 3 2-drops. It's hard enough by turn 2 to draw 1 2-drop. Just getting 2 more draws to get another 2-drop is difficult enough. To get 2 more 2-drops, to actually make that kind of game plan a real game plan, you need, I forget the exact math, but I think it's something around the lines of 12 or 13 2-mana cards that you can reliably play. Even if they're not 2-drops, there's still cards that you could play out, right? Like an Argent Protector, or like a Defias Ringleader or something, right?
Yeah.
So unless you're hitting that number, you still need some 4s. Like if you have 1 4, that kind of cuts down a lot on the number of 2s you need, right? Like maybe you only need like 10 or something. But the more 2s you have, the more consistent your earlier game plan is. And the more 4s you have, the more consistent your normal, play a 4 on turn 4 game plan is. So that middle zone where you have like 8 or 9 2-drops and then 1 or 2 4-drops is actually really awkward, because your chances of getting 3 2-drops is still really low. But your chances of getting that 4-drop is also low because you don't have enough 4-drops. And it creates this, like, it's kind of the worst of both worlds, right? Because an extra 2-drop in your hand going into turn 4 without a follow-up is kind of pointless. That doesn't make you curve out on 4 any better than if you didn't have that card. You need to hit 3. And that percentage rises exponentially the more cards you add, because of, how probability works. So,
yes.
when people are trying to build a deck where you're actually replacing 4s with 2s, that deck has to go really fast. Or you have to be very comfortable using a hero power on turn 4. Which, if you're like a Paladin, you may be very comfortable with. If you're a Rogue, you could be super comfortable with it, right? Like, those are all very valid things to do. But if you're like a warrior or like a priest or like, a hunter, this is not necessarily the best thing that you want to be doing. Even like a warlock, right? It's just not... It's not really your game plan. So that's why 4s are still important. You really need to plan your deck out very well in order to kind of skip 4s or to get like only 1 or 2 4s and say, oh, that's okay. Otherwise, you lose the board on turn 4 way too often, and that, is not good.
Yeah. So
and it's really not good if you have all those 2s. It's the worst thing, right? You have all those 2s, and then you lose the board on turn 4, and you still have to play aggressive because you don't have card advantage.
yeah, and this is why historically, when hunters were a little bit better in the meta, I was a big fan of just playing two drops on turn 4, and I thought that was actually a very strong strategy if you are an extremely aggressive class, and you could do it just because you can afford to do it, and just because you're going to run out of cards anyways, and
and it's also worth noting that with a class like Hunter, and you're really going that aggressive, you also have 1s. And so on turn 4, you can play a 1 and a 3 also. So that also makes up for some more of the lack of 4 drops if you choose to go that way.
Yes, definitely. So, but unfortunately, other classes are going to have a really hard time pulling that off. And like we talked about before, other classes are just going to outvalue you as well. And you better hope that they don't have any AoE, or otherwise you're going to run out of steam and you're just not going to make it.
Yeah, so if you're really going that fast and you're going to try to use 2s to compensate for your 4s, also make sure you have 3s and 1s. Don't just look at it as, 2 plus 2 equals 4. I need more 2s if I don't have 4s. Like, really consider the fact that you may draw 2 3-drops, even if you only have like 4 or 5 3s, which is the normal amount you want to have. You may draw 2 of them, and then if you have an extra 1 hanging around, well, there you go. And you want to go fast anyway, so 1s are generally a good idea in that strategy. So it's a very different way of playing. You can't just kind of take a normal mid-range deck, say, I'm missing 4, so let's take way more 2s. Or at least that'll only solve the problem in a very inefficient way. It's better than not solving the problem at all, right? And taking like an 8-drop, but it's not going to be the same.
Definitely.
All right, so let's move on to question from the GOAT. Before we go there, we have a GOAT. It is on Patreon, so www.patreon.com/grinninggoat. That is how this podcast and all of our other stuff is being supported right now. So if you like the content, please feel free to contribute a pledge on patreon.com/grinninggoat. Now for the question from the GOAT.
All right. So I can't believe how long we've been doing this for. I remember us doing this last year as well. And I figured at this time of the year, it's a good time to not only reflect, but to look forward because the new year is upon us. So ADWCTA, I want to ask you, what is your Hearthstone New Year's resolution?
My Hearthstone New Year's resolution. Okay. So I have been always... historically, for pretty much ever, very consistently, while other classes have risen and fallen, I have been consistently awful with Priest. I have my Hunter days where I was great with Hunter. I have my Shaman days where I was great with Shaman. I obviously had my Warrior days, and I think the Warrior days are coming back, which is really fun. My Warlock was bad in the beginning, but now it's one of my top classes. So the only class left for me, in terms of a class that I have never had a good period with, is the Priest. And so my New Year's resolution is that in the next year, I will, at one point, over the course of 10 runs, average 7.5 wins per run with Priest. It's not an insane goal, right?
It's not. No.
It's not an insane goal, but I don't think I've ever accomplished that before. My Priest average is typically around like 7. And it's very consistently so. I never get like streaks of doing well with Priest. So I want to get to a point where I can say, like, in this meta or in whatever meta, my Priest was more than 7.5 wins per run.
I like it. I like it. It is a realistic one, and it is one that you can, um, you can reach towards and really work towards. I like it. That's how New Year's resolution should be. It shouldn't be someone saying like, "I'm gonna fly to the moon," and you're just like, "Well, that was a wasted New Year's
Or
resolution."
like, I'm gonna work out next year.
Yeah,
Or maybe
that's
that's just me.
ridiculous for you.
It just
You might as well fly to the moon. At least there's a chance there, right? Actually, that requires working out first. So actually,
I
there's
was
a
about
chance
to
of
say, no one's gonna send me to the
that.
moon. Are you kidding me?
I think that is. I think that's very fair.
Oh.
All right. So for my New Year's resolution, Hearthstone New Year's resolutions, I have two. One is a little bit more far-reaching, and one is more immediate, just like for you. So my first New Year's resolution, the one that is more reachable, is it's pretty much like yours. I want to improve both my priest and my shaman game.
Oh, way to one up me.
I know, exactly. But and what I hope to do is to learn from other people in the community as well. And it's what I had been doing, but I plan on taking a more proactive approach and doing it. And I feel actually pretty good about my priest game so far, but the sample size is not big enough for me to say like, yeah, I'm great with it now. I don't think I'm a bad player in either class by any means, but we definitely hold ourselves up to high standards. So that's kind of my New Year's resolution, and my bigger New Year's resolution is, and this is kind of out of my control, but I hope that in this next coming year, I will either participate or cast a Hearthstone arena tournament. Fingers
Oh,
crossed.
dude.
Yeah.
Good luck. Good
Yeah.
luck.
Thanks. It's not the moon, okay? It's like it's more realistic, right?
Yeah. But like you said, it's kind of outside of your control.
It is outside of my control, so we'll see. But
So that's not a good foundation for a resolution.
well, that's why I had a more realistic one, and there's
All right.
and there's this one that's more out there. There we go.
Okay, so that's I guess, our Hearthstone New Year's resolutions, and let's move on to Card Good Bad. Card Good Bad today. Card Good Bad is where we tell you a card is good or bad, and the card we're talking about today is Rampage from the Warrior. And the Rampage, the answer is, I think, pretty obvious, which is that it is not a good card. It is a definitely a below average card. And if you look at it, so Rampage, if you don't know, and you might not because no one ever uses this card and no one ever plays Warrior, and so you never see Warrior. It's a 2-mana card that's +3, that gives a minion +3/+3. It's a buff. So I used to think this was the worst card ever because it's very difficult to trigger. And if you do trigger it, chances are you're triggering it after you hurt one of your minions. So it doesn't even get initiative. And if you don't have the board, you're never going to be able to use Rampage. So it's a dead card in a decent amount of the situations that you face, and in some of the other situations, it doesn't get its kind of like full good value. Now, of course, 2 mana for +3/+3 is very good, right? Normally 2 mana will get you +2/+2. If you look at Demon Fire or Mark of Nature, Mark of the Wild. So you do get a little bonus, but I had always thought of this card as really bad. However, lately, do you want to talk about what our experiences with Rampage lately?
Okay, we have had some crazy experiences with Rampage. Most notably, Raging Worgen with Inner Rage and Rampage. Pretty good.
Very good.
Great finisher. Also great when paired with Happy Feast of Wintervale for the BM.
That's going to be gone after this week. I'm going to be so sad when that happens.
You got to cherish it, man. You got to BM to your heart's content every single game.
Done. We're going to do that in our next run.
That's our New Year's resolution. BM as much as possible. There we go. So that would be our third New Year's resolution. But talking about Rampage, I think part of the reason why it's become a better card, I don't think it was kind of like, oh, everyone got the evaluation wrong, and now everyone is like seeing the
And not
light.
everyone got the evaluation wrong. I remember one person by the name of Ratsma had continuously told us that Rampage was an amazing card from like last year around this time, and we had it at like maybe like a 20 rating at that point. And I think now it's, I don't know, is it up to a 40? Maybe not even up to a 40.
Maybe. I don't know.
But we've basically come around. But he had always viewed it as like still a below average card, but like
Yes.
somewhere in the 40s.
Okay, yeah. So it was an amazing. Let's not put words in his mouth. He wouldn't pick it over an unlegitimately good card.
Yeah.
But that's true. Ratsmo was someone who had always had this card higher than where we had it, and part of it is also just this play style, right? He played at that time, especially. He played a lot more aggressively than we did. He always had sort of this hodgepodge small board of little stuff. So it made sense that in his play style, and back then, our play styles were very different. His play style definitely favored Rampage. And this also goes to why Rampage is not that bad anymore. Because boards are complicated,
Yes.
it's very hard to completely clear a board. It's very hard for either side to completely clear. So Rampage, you get more opportunities, you get more hits with Rampage, and if you do get to use Rampage, it's pretty good value. It's like Blessing Kings is great, Valen's Chosen is great, Rampage is great in that same way. It's just harder to activate, but now the activation is much easier. So
Yeah, I do want to point out though that Rampage is still not quite the same as Blessing of Kings or Valen's, even if you do pull it off, because it's hitting on a damaged minion, which means it has less defense, and you normally want the minions that you buff the same amount of attack and defense to have more defense. So Valen's builds that into the buff. Kings, you can buff on anything. This, you have to buff on something that's already hurt, so chances are its attack is more than its defense at that point. Of course, not necessarily, right? You can trigger it on many things. You can hurt your own minions as the warrior. But one more thing that I want to talk about of why Rampage has become, I think, a lot better in LoE too, is that the warrior now has kind of this focus on taunting stuff, right?
Yeah.
And taunting stuff is super important in terms of keeping one of your old minions on the board alive. Because you make a good trade, and then rather than just putting down a minion and having your opponent eat up whatever minion you just made the good trade with, you instead put up a taunt that your opponent has to hit into first. Or, maybe he doesn't even want to hit into it and he just doesn't do anything. And the next turn you can Rampage. So that is a not uncommon scenario that you're going to start seeing. And you see it much more often now than you used to because of Obsidian Destroyer, because of Fierce Monkey, because you have some like minor taunt synergies around the warrior.
Yeah, so all of this is contributing to Rampage being better, being a more relevant card, and it's cool. We love seeing sort of the meta, and this is what we talk about when we say, the meta has shifted. It's not just playstyles are different. Suddenly, cards are a little bit better, a little bit worse, and Rampage is one that has seen this change throughout the times. And also, I like when you brought up Ratsman because it introduces another factor, playstyle, right? Certain playstyles will elevate or kind of downgrade certain cards, and Rampage is definitely one in which if you take the board, if you have a lot of just random stuff there, Rampage is better.
Yep. All right, so that's card good, bad, Rampage. Still a bad card, but getting better. Maybe one day the warrior will be able to hurt its minions so well, and the meta turns into a situation where just damaged minions are all over the place, and Rampage actually becomes like a really good card. But not yet. Oh, the Sea Reaver deck, yeah. Sea Reaver, by the way, really bad. Not really bad. It's okay. We could probably also do a card good bad on Sea Reaver sometime. But let's move on to the class that we're going to play next. And we actually talked about this fairly recently, maybe 3 Lightforges back. But we're going to do it again because it's been a while since we played. We're behind on our Paladins. So we're doing a Paladin this week again. And we're not upset about doing a Paladin, obviously, because it is it's a very good class. And so the OE meta brought kind of one big thing to one big change to the Paladin that overshadows kind of everything else, and that's Keeper of Oldemon. And removing the TGT bonus brought one big thing to the meta, which is it means less Murloc Knights and it means less Seal of Champions. Less Seal of Champions is devastating for the Paladin because Seal of Champion is one of those gotcha cards where there's just not much you can ever do to it. It will always get more than its 3 mana's worth of value. And on the other hand, Murloc Knight kind of changed the way the Paladin could play, right? You could play way more into the late game with a Murloc Knight. You just establish the board, put a Murloc Knight out, he can't finish it off, you win. You don't even need any other cards. You have infinite card advantage. But Keeper of Oldemon adds its own distinct kind of flavor onto the Paladin that's very different from Murloc Knight. It's a one-shot battle cry, and that battle cry can either bring you a lot of tempo on one turn, so it's one more way for the Paladin to gain extra tempo, or and especially if you have something with Divine Shield already. Or you can use it to remove your opponent's big minion and then gain tempo that way. So it's kind of a reactive and or proactive card that makes the Paladin also be able to deal with big things that it couldn't before. It just adds a lot more flexibility, while Murloc Knight had added a larger late game, I think, than even Keeper of Oldemon.
Yeah, I like how you bring up all of these cards, and I want to talk about the relationship of these cards for a second. So all three of these cards, Seal of Champs, Murloc Knight, and Keeper of Oldemon, they are all premium cards. No one's going to deny that. If you look at the two TGT cards, Seal of Champs and Murloc Knight, Seal of Champs, it's such a good card just because of the printed value from it, right? But if you kind of analyze the card deeper, it's basically just, it does the same thing Blessing of Kings does, right? You have a minion and you have a bigger minion while killing off their minion. So it's the same concept there. Murloc Knight was very powerful because it did something that Paladins lacked. It gave them a late game sort of board spread, right? Which Paladins didn't have. They had early game board spread in Muster for Battle, and you saw how powerful Muster for Battle was. And now they had a late game board spread. And by giving Paladins like tools that they didn't have already, you're making a good class better. And the same concept applies for a Keeper of Oldemon, because the Keeper, what it does is it gives Paladins something that they couldn't do before, which was manipulate the board in a certain way, right? Like before, they couldn't manipulate the board. They kind of hammered the board with buffs, right? So they either buffed a guy to kill it, or they outdoored it or something. But outdoor was a rare. With Keeper, now you can kind of mold your own board. You could kind of turn their board into a 3/3. There's just so much flexibility, and it just introduced this aspect of the game that Paladins didn't have before.
Yeah, definitely. First pick, Keeper of Oldemon or Murloc Knight?
Ooh, I would go Keeper.
Yeah. I'd go Keeper hands down too.
Yep.
Murloc Knight also got weaker because they introduced crappy Murloc.
Yes.
Sorry,
very
the best
cute
Murloc.
Both of them.
The best Murloc, but a low mana costing Murloc. Yeah. So, all of those factors kind of put in. Keeper of Oldemon is actually just the better card, I think. And Merps agrees as well. So Paladin got better. I think just hands down, after TGT with the LOE bonus, just because of Keeper of Oldemon, Paladin got better. And it's not like their old cards weren't good, right?
Yeah.
So I think something to always keep in mind is that even though it seems like we just swapped the TGT bonus for the LOE bonus, what really happened is the TGT bonus has such a large effect that even by adding the new cards in LOE and adding the LOE bonus, your old classic cards are still being seen more often now than they were under TGT. So, the classes that were good in Classic are once again getting a boost now, and Paladin was always one of the top classes. So
yeah. You just fear them in a completely different way now. Before, when it was a completely empty board and you dropped Boulder Fist Ogre, you felt pretty safe, right?
Yep.
Against the Paladin. I'm like,
nope.
He has nothing, he can't truce over that. He has to equality and do something like equality shenanigans. At worst, he's going to outdoor it, right? But whatever. Now, he just completely dominates your 6-drop with a 4-drop. And you're just like, oh, come on, dude. That's so unfair.
Absolutely. It's a common card, class card, and we should probably mention this in the very beginning. The Hearth Arena has been looking at the offering rates of all of these cards and doing their statistic. They're gathering the stats, and they published something on the front page of Reddit last week, which is that the LOE bonus is not 25%, it's 50%. So, to whatever extent that affects the way you draft or evaluate your decks, it is 50%, not 25%. And there's also some kind of weird thing going on with like epic cards and like. It's basically not 50% consistent throughout, but for common cards it's 50%, and so I think we should all think of it as 50%, and the other inconsistencies is probably a bug, and Blizzard has acknowledged that this exists, and they are now either looking to fix it or saying that it's working as intended. But the Hearth Arena did get a response from them, so hopefully that'll be fixed down the road. It's not the biggest change because 25%, 50%, it's just a few LOE cards. You know you're getting more of them. But it is, do know that there is some kind of bug going on right now with the offering rates on the, I forget if it affects rare cards, but it definitely affects at least epic cards. And it's just shifting the odds in a really weird way with the LOE cards.
Yep.
So I guess that's the note we will end on. This is ADWCTA.
This is Merps. See you guys in the new year.
Happy Feast of Wintervale. Happy New Year.
Bye, guys.